The ground shook before I even saw it. I felt the tremor through my boots, a slow and heavy pulse, like something enormous was breathing beneath the earth. Then the sky split open with light, and the ship came down over the city, blotting out the sun. It did not roar. It did not fire a single weapon. It simply arrived, and the silence that followed was worse than any explosion. I was standing on a rooftop when the being stepped out. It was easily 30 feet tall, built like something carved from a mountain, its skin catching the light like polished stone. It did not walk toward us with menace. It walked with the calm of something that had never once considered losing. Then it spoke. The voice did not come from its mouth. It came from everywhere at once, inside every phone, every radio, every mind that could understand language. I am called Vorak Theen. I have crossed farther than your kind can imagine, and I have come to test what you are. Somewhere among you there must be one who stands taller than fear itself. Send me your best, and let them face me alone. If none of you dare, then your entire species will be marked as unworthy of the stars, and you will never leave this small blue world. For 3 days, nobody moved. I watched it on every screen in every language. Presidents spoke behind podiums about strategy and caution. Generals whispered about calculations and risk. Everyone had a reason to wait, and every reason sounded smaller than the last. I had spent years overseas as an engineer, attached to rescue units, pulling people out of collapsed buildings, patching up soldiers who should not have survived the night. I had seen fear before, but I had never seen an entire planet freeze at once. On the third night, I sat alone in my apartment with the television playing footage of the giant standing motionless in a crater outside the city, patient as stone, waiting for someone, anyone to answer. My name is Callum Bray. I am nobody special. I am not a soldier anymore, not since the accident that ended my service. I have a scar along my ribs and a habit of counting exits in every room I enter. But that night, watching world leaders argue about who should die first, something inside me went very quiet and very clear. I picked up my jacket and walked out the door. By morning, I had registered myself at the Emergency Coordination Center. The officer behind the desk looked at me like I had lost my mind. "You understand what you are volunteering for," he said. "I understand that nobody else is standing up," I told him. "That is enough of a reason for me." They tried to talk me out of it. They offered me every kind of weapon, every kind of armor, teams of scientists studying the giant from a distance, none of it useful, none of it tested. In the end, I refused most of it. I kept only a simple tool belt from my old rescue work, the kind of gear I trusted with my life more than any borrowed rifle. The morning I walked toward the crater, the streets were empty and lined with people watching from windows and rooftops. Cameras from every country pointed at my back. Nobody cheered, nobody spoke. They simply watched, holding their breath the way you do when you are not sure the person walking away will come back. An old friend from my rescue unit, a woman named Priya Nolan, caught up with me at the edge of the barricade. She did not try to stop me. She just gripped my arm and said, "Come back and tell me it was worth it." I promised her I would try. The crater was wide and scorched, and Vorak Theen stood at its center like a monument that had decided to move. Up close, he was even larger than the broadcasts had shown, and his eyes held something I did not expect. Not cruelty, curiosity. "You are the one who answered," he said, his voice rattling my chest even without volume. "I am," I said. "You understand this is not a game. Many who came before your kind did not survive their trial." "I understand," I said. "I am still here." He studied me the way you study a puzzle piece that does not seem to fit the picture. Then he raised a hand, and the air around us thickened, turning heavy and strange, like walking through water. He said this was the first trial, a test of endurance against pressure that would crush ordinary bone. I dropped to one knee immediately, breath forced out of my lungs, every joint screaming under a weight that should not exist. My vision blurred at the edges, but I remembered years of training in flooded tunnels and collapsed buildings, remembered how to slow my breathing until my body stopped panicking and started listening. I focused on one detail at a time, the seam of my glove, the pressure across my shoulders, the rhythm of my own heartbeat. Slowly, I forced myself back onto my feet. Vorak Theen tilted his head. "Interesting," he said, and released the pressure. The second trial came without warning. The ground beneath me split apart in jagged lines of light, and shapes rose from the crater floor, humanoid figures made of solid energy, moving with the memory of combat forms too advanced for me to counter with strength. I could not match their speed. I could not match their power, so I did not try to fight them the way they expected. I used the terrain instead. I ducked behind broken stone, timed their movements, let them collide into each other in the narrow gaps of the crater. I used my tool belt, a length of cable, a flare, anything within reach, turning ordinary objects into obstacles that confused patterns built for war, not improvisation. One by one, the shapes faltered and dissolved back into light. Vorak Thien watched without expression, but something behind his eyes had shifted. "You do not fight as I expected," he said. "You do not meet strength with strength." "I have never had strength like yours," I told him, breathing hard. "I have only ever had the will to keep standing after everything else fails." He was silent for a long moment, and in that silence I felt the entire world holding its breath with me. Then he said something that surprised me more than any trial so far. "The final test is not strength," he said. "It is choice." The ground shifted again, and this time I found myself standing at the edge of a narrow beam of light stretched high above the crater, with two paths glowing faintly ahead. One path, he explained, would grant me victory in the trial and secure humanity's place among the stars, but at a cost only I would carry. The other path would end the trial quietly, with no burden placed on me, but with humanity marked as untested, still unproven, still waiting behind a closed door to the galaxy. "Choose carefully," he said. "Many who chose before you chose themselves." I thought of Priya waiting behind the barricade. I thought of every person who had stayed silent while I stepped forward, not because they were cowards, but because they had families, responsibilities, reasons to protect the ones they loved. I thought of every rescue I had ever taken part in, every time I had chosen to walk into danger so someone else did not have to. I did not hesitate long. I chose the harder path. The light around me surged, and for a moment I felt like my body had been stretched thin across the entire crater, every nerve alight with something I had no name for. Then it passed, and I was on my knees, gasping, but still breathing, still whole. Vorak Thien knelt down, bringing his massive form level with mine for the first time. "You did not know what the cost would be," he said. "Yet you chose it anyway, for people who will never know your name." "That is what it means to be human," I told him, voice hoarse. "We do not need to know the cost to decide it is worth paying." He straightened slowly, and the crater around us began to still, the strange energy fading back into ordinary dust and stone. "Your kind has passed," he announced, his voice carrying out to every screen, every home, every frightened city holding its breath. "Not because you are the strongest among the stars, not because you could defeat me, but because you stood when standing meant everything could be lost, and you chose the harder path without asking what it would cost you first." The crowd beyond the barricade erupted, but I barely heard it. My legs were shaking, my chest burned, and every part of me wanted to collapse right there in the dirt. But I stayed standing, because somewhere in that crowd, Priya was watching, and I had promised her I would come back and tell her it was worth it. Vorak Thien turned to leave, then paused and looked back at me one final time. "There will be others who come after me," he said. "Other trials, other tests, harder than this one. Your world has opened a door tonight that cannot be closed again." "I understand," I said. "Then I hope, for your sake, that you are not the only one willing to walk through it." He rose into the sky without another word, and the massive ship above the city began to pull away, leaving nothing behind but scorched earth, a stunned planet, and a silence that finally felt like relief instead of fear. I walked out of that crater on legs that barely held me, and Priya was the first person to reach me, pulling me into an embrace so tight I nearly fell over again. Around us, the crowd was shouting my name, but all I could think about was the simple truth I had learned standing in front of something that could have erased me without a second thought. Courage was never about being the strongest one in the room. It was about being the one who stood up anyway, when everyone else stayed silent, and chose to carry the cost so someone else would not have to. That night, humanity did not just earn its place among the stars. It remembered something about itself that fear had almost made it forget.